In the autumn of 1826, a disgraced duke made an offer laced with desperation and venom. 6 months to live, one impossible demand, a daughter's future hanging in the balance, and the woman he once punished was his only hope. How do you bargain with a man who has nothing left to lose? Juliet cleverly was about to find out. The duke who ruined her life was standing at her textile mill workstation in Manchester, coughing blood into a monogrammed handkerchief, offering her everything. If she could give him the one thing no woman can promise, a son.
Hello everyone! Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video and share with loved ones, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
In the autumn of 1826, when England's rigid class divisions made crossing social boundaries nearly impossible, a disgraced duke was about to make an offer no respectable woman should accept. This is a story about desperation, about impossible choices, and about how sometimes the coldest transactions can transform into the fiercest love. The question haunts us all. How far would you go to save someone you love? Lord Joseph Mason, Duke of Hertford, stood at the window of his Surrey estate manor, watching rain slash against the glass. He was 41 years old and dying. The growth in his abdomen had been growing for months, a malignant tenant eating him from the inside. Dr. Benjamin Harrison had been brutally clear. 6 months, perhaps less. Joseph coughed, tasting copper, and folded the bloodied handkerchief quickly, hiding the evidence, even though no one was watching. Behind him, his solicitor Bartholomew Wright cleared his throat nervously. "Your Grace, the legal situation is dire." Joseph turned from the window, his gaunt face carved with shadows. "Explain." Wright opened a leather portfolio with trembling hands. "Mr. Jeremy Cunningham has discovered an obscure provision in the guardianship laws. As Lady Dorothy's godfather, and with his wife being her godmother, they have legal standing to petition for guardianship upon your death. Given that Lady Dorothy is only 4 years old and you have no other heirs, he'll get her." Joseph's voice was flat, dead. "He'll get my daughter and control the estates through her until she comes of age." "I'm afraid so, Your Grace. Unless—" Wright hesitated. "Unless what?" "Unless you produce a male heir. A legitimate son would supersede Lady Dorothy in the line of succession. The guardianship claim would become void." Joseph laughed bitterly. The sound echoed in the vast study. A son, in 6 months, while dying. He moved to his desk, gripping the edge as a wave of pain rolled through him. "I have no wife, Wright. My dear Eleanor died 3 years ago. You would need to marry immediately, Your Grace, and conceive quickly." The absurdity of it should have been laughable. Joseph Mason, once a respected member of Parliament, now a political pariah, thanks to Jeremy Cunningham's orchestrated financial scandal. His reputation destroyed, his health failing, his fortune intact, but his legacy crumbling. And now this, a race against death, to produce a male heir before his treacherous former business partner could steal everything through his innocent daughter. "Find me a woman," Joseph said coldly, "young enough to conceive quickly, desperate enough to accept unusual terms. I don't care about breeding or reputation. I need a womb, Wright, nothing more." Wright's face paled. "Your Grace, such a proposal is scandalous. My reputation is already ashes. Find me someone who needs what I can offer. Money, security, a title. Someone with nothing to lose." The solicitor departed, leaving Joseph alone with his rage and fear. He walked down the corridor to the nursery where his daughter Dorothy played under her governess's watchful eye. The child looked up as he entered, her blue eyes, so like her mother's, widening with something that broke his heart. Fear. "Papa?" Her voice was small, uncertain. Joseph knelt with difficulty, pain shooting through his abdomen. "Hello, darling." Dorothy clutched her doll tighter. She'd been different since the Cunninghams' last visit, when Jeremy had gripped her arm too hard and his wife Dorothy had whispered poisonous words about accidents that happen to little girls who inherit too much. "Are Uncle Jeremy and Aunt Dorothy coming back?" Dorothy whispered. Joseph touched her cheek gently. "Not if I can help it, my dear. Not if I can help it." But as he left the nursery, he knew the truth. He was running out of time, and Jeremy Cunningham was closing in like a wolf circling wounded prey. 200 miles north in Manchester, in a cramped boarding house near the textile mills, Juliet Cleverly was living her own nightmare, dressed as ordinary life. The textile mill floor was deafening, a cacophony of spinning looms and shouting overseers. Juliet Cleverly's fingers moved mechanically across the cotton threads, calloused and bleeding from 14 hours of work. She was 27 years old and felt ancient. The daughter of a country vicar, she'd once served as lady's maid to the Duchess of Hartfield, wearing clean dresses and sleeping in warm servants' quarters. Then, Jeremy Cunningham had whispered lies about stolen silver, and the Duke had thrown her into the streets without a reference. Now, she sewed fabric in a Manchester mill while her younger brother Samuel coughed his lungs out in their boarding house room. When the letter arrived that evening, sealed with the Hartfield ducal crest, Juliet stared at it with hands that trembled from exhaustion and something darker: rage. "Lord Joseph Mason, Duke of Hartfield, requests your immediate presence at the Royal Hotel. Urgent matter. Private business. Transportation and accommodation provided." Samuel, lying on their narrow bed, turned his pale face toward her. "What is it?" "The Duke who destroyed us wants something." Juliet's voice was hard, but she was already calculating. The physician had said Samuel needed 6 months of proper treatment and clean air, or the consumption would kill him. 6 months cost money she didn't have. The journey to the Royal Hotel took 6 hours. Juliet wore her only decent dress, grey and carefully mended. When she entered the private suite, Joseph Mason stood by the window, and she barely recognized him. 3 years ago, he'd been robust, commanding. Now, he looked like death, barely postponed, gaunt, grey-skinned, hollow-eyed. "Miss Cleverly." Not a greeting, a statement. "Sit." Juliet remained standing. "I'm here because you paid for transportation. Say what you want, Your Grace, and I'll decide if I'm listening." Something flickered in Joseph's cold eyes. Surprise, perhaps respect. He got straight to it. "I'm dying. Consumption of the organs, 6 months maximum. I have no male heir. When I die, my former business partner Jeremy Cunningham will claim guardianship of my 4-year-old daughter through legal manipulation. He'll control the estates through her and destroy everything within months. The man is a monster." Juliet's throat tightened. She remembered Jeremy's cruel smile when she'd been dismissed. Joseph slid a document across the table. "I'm proposing marriage. You will conceive a child, a son. When I die, you inherit a substantial widow's portion. The dukedom passes to our son, cutting Jeremy from any claim. My daughter remains safe." The air left Juliet's lungs. She stared at him, unable to speak. "This is a transaction, Miss Cleverly. Nothing more. I need your womb. You need money. I'm offering you a way out of poverty in exchange for 6 months of your life." He paused, his voice dropping to something colder. "Give me a son, no daughters. I already have one child who makes me vulnerable. I won't risk another." Juliet found her voice, sharp as broken glass. "You destroyed my life 3 years ago. You believed Jeremy's lies without investigation. You threw me into the streets without a reference and watched me beg for mercy. Yes, no apology, just acknowledgement. And now you expect me to—" She couldn't finish. "I expect nothing. I'm offering a trade. Your brother Samuel is dying of consumption in that filthy boarding house. I checked. 6 months of proper medical treatment could save him. I'm offering that treatment immediate and complete, plus £20,000 upon my death." Joseph's grey eyes bored into hers. "You hate me. I don't care. Do you love your brother enough to do what's necessary?" Juliet thought of Samuel's bloody cough, their empty pantry, the approaching winter, the mill overseer's wandering hands. She thought of the Duke's terrified daughter, whom she'd once cradled during nightmares. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. "Samuel gets treatment starting immediately. He lives on the estate with proper care. I want full education in estate management, not as decoration, but as real training. And your daughter Dorothy comes under my protection the moment we marry." Done. The wedding is in 1 week. Juliet stood, extended her hand across the table. His grip was firm, despite his illness. 1 week. But understand this, Your Grace. I'll never forgive you for what you did to me. This is business, nothing more. Good. Joseph's smile was bitter. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just conception." As Juliet left the hotel, she realized she'd just sold herself, but she'd also bought Samuel's life and perhaps a little girl's safety. Sometimes there are no good choices, only necessary ones. The wedding took place on a grey November morning in the small chapel at Hartfield Manor. No flowers, no music, no guests beyond the required witnesses. Juliet wore the same grey dress she'd worn to the proposal. Joseph wore black, as though attending a funeral rather than a wedding. The vicar spoke of love and devotion, with a voice that echoed hollowly in the empty space. Juliet barely heard the words. She felt numb, watching herself from a distance as she spoke vows that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. "I do," Joseph said, his voice flat. "I do," Juliet whispered. No kiss, just a cold exchange of rings and the scratch of pen on marriage register. Dorothy had been brought to the ceremony, a tiny figure in white lace, her eyes wide and confused. When Juliet knelt beside her afterward, the child flinched. "I won't hurt you, sweetheart," Juliet said softly. "I'm here to keep you safe." Dorothy's lower lip trembled. "Promise?" "I promise." The wedding night arrived with the inevitability of an execution. Joseph knocked on Juliet's chamber door at 10 o'clock. She opened it, heart pounding so hard she thought he must hear it. He entered carrying a single lamp, his face unreadable. "I won't pretend this is pleasant for either of us," he said quietly, "but it's necessary." Juliet lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. "Then let's not prolong the indignity." What followed was clinical, awkward, painful. Joseph was surprisingly careful, apologizing when she flinched, but there was no tenderness, just two bodies fulfilling a contract. When it ended, he sat on the bed's edge, not touching her. "I'm sorry. This is your wedding night," he said finally. "You deserve better." Juliet pulled the sheet around herself. "We both did. But we're doing what we must." He looked at her then, really looked, and something flickered in those cold grey eyes. Recognition, perhaps, Respect for a woman bearing this with dignity he hadn't expected. "You're stronger than you know, Juliet." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The following days passed in uncomfortable silence. Samuel arrived at the estate, moved into a comfortable cottage, and began treatment under Dr. Harrison's care. The estate staff whispered about the new Duchess, who'd once been dismissed as a thief. Only the housekeeper, Mrs. Adelaide, showed Juliet any kindness. "I never believed those accusations, Your Grace," the older woman said, quietly. "Mr. Cunningham has always been a snake." Then, on the fourth evening, everything changed. Juliet found Dorothy huddled in the library corner, sobbing. The child's arm bore fresh bruises, 4 small finger marks. "Who did this?" Juliet demanded, kneeling beside her. "Aunt Dorothy," the girl whispered. "She came this afternoon with Uncle Jeremy. She said, 'I'm clumsy and stupid, and when Papa dies, they'll teach me proper manners.' She pinched me hard and said it was practice." Rage, white-hot and clarifying, flooded through Juliet. She gathered Dorothy into her arms. "Listen to me carefully. They will never touch you again. Do you understand? Never." She found Joseph in his study, reviewing estate ledgers. Without preamble, she pushed up Dorothy's sleeve, revealing the bruises. "Your former business partner's wife did this to your daughter this afternoon. In your house, while you were 20 feet away." Joseph's face went white, then red, his hands clenched into fists. I didn't know they'd—" "You didn't look," Juliet cut him off. "Your daughter is terrified of them. She has nightmares. She flinches when doors open. And you've been so consumed with your own bitterness and your obsession with a male heir that you haven't seen what's happening to the child you already have." Joseph stood slowly, pain crossing his features. "What do you want me to do? Use your power. You're a duke. Ban them from this estate. Hire solicitors to document their threats. Stop being helpless and fight for her." For a long moment, Joseph stared at Juliet. Then he moved to his desk, pulled out paper, and began writing. "Wright will have formal notices delivered by morning. The Cunninghams are banned from Hartfield Manor and all estate properties. Any violation will result in legal action." He looked up at Juliet, something raw in his expression. "I failed her, just like I failed Eleanor. I'm failing everyone." "Then stop failing," Juliet said quietly. "You have 6 months. Make them count." Joseph nodded slowly. "Will you help me? Not just with conceiving an heir, but with protecting her." "Really protecting her?" Juliet thought of Dorothy's bruised arm, her terrified eyes. "Yes, but not for you. For her." "Fair enough." Joseph extended his hand. "Partners?" Juliet shook it. "Partners. In this, at least." As she left the study, Juliet realized something had shifted between them. Not warmth, not forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of something more dangerous: mutual respect. If this story is moving you, subscribe now, because what happens next will change everything between them. The pregnancy, the secrets, and Jeremy's darkest schemes are coming, and you won't want to miss a moment. 2 months into their arrangement, Juliet woke feeling violently nauseous. She barely made it to the wash basin before retching. For 5 mornings, the same pattern. Her courses hadn't come. Her breasts felt tender, swollen. She knew. Dr. Harrison arrived that afternoon, examined her privately with Mrs. Adelaide present. When he emerged, his expression was carefully neutral. "Congratulations, Your Grace. Approximately 8 weeks along." Joseph received the news in his study with visible relief. "Thank God. How long until we know if it's male?" "Your Grace, we cannot determine. I need a son, Harrison, not another burden." Juliet, standing in the doorway, felt ice in her veins. Another burden. That's how he saw Dorothy. How he'd see any daughter. But she said nothing. Not yet. By week 14, Juliet's pregnancy symptoms intensified. The nausea was relentless, her fatigue crushing. Mrs. Adelaide suggested consulting a London specialist, someone beyond Dr. Harrison's country practice. In a private Harley Street office, Dr. Edmund Pritchard examined Juliet thoroughly. When he finished, his face was grave. "Your Grace, I need to inform you of something unusual. You're carrying twins." Juliet's world tilted. "Twins?" "Yes, based on palpation and the size of your womb, I'm quite certain. Approximately 14 weeks gestation." He paused. "One is positioned higher, one lower. It's impossible to determine sex, but statistically, with twins, you have various combinations possible." Juliet's mind raced. One boy, one girl, two boys, two girls. Joseph's obsession with a male heir consumed him. If she told him about twins, and one was female, "Dr. Pritchard, I need you to say nothing about this to anyone." The physician frowned. "Your Grace, His Grace should be informed. My husband is dying and desperate. If I tell him I'm carrying twins with no guarantee of a male child, it will destroy what little peace we've built. Please, I'm asking you as a physician who serves his patients' well-being." Dr. Pritchard studied her carefully. "You're protecting these babies." "Yes, both of them, regardless of sex." He nodded slowly. "The information stays between us. But Your Grace, at birth, the truth will emerge. You should prepare for that." Juliet returned to Surrey, carrying a secret that felt like lead in her chest. Meanwhile, Joseph's health deteriorated rapidly. The growth in his abdomen was visible now, a hard mass pressing against his skin. He coughed blood frequently, tried to hide it, failed. His weight dropped alarmingly. Dr. Harrison quietly revised his estimate. 4 months, perhaps less. One evening, as they reviewed tenant contracts in the study, a nightly ritual that had become almost companionable, Joseph suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "What?" Juliet asked. "I'm grateful," he said quietly, "for this, for you. I expected this arrangement to be tolerable at best." He paused. "Instead, these evenings have become the best part of my days. You're not just intelligent, Juliet. You're extraordinary." Juliet felt something warm and dangerous unfold in her chest. Something that felt like hope. "You're not what I expected either, Joseph." Their eyes held. Neither looked away. Then Dorothy burst into the study, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, Mama Juliet, a letter came." Joseph took the document, his face darkening as he read. "Jeremy. He's filed a petition with the Court of Chancery, claiming I'm mentally incompetent due to my illness. He's arguing my recent decisions, including our marriage, demonstrate impaired judgment." "Can he do that?" Juliet demanded. "He's trying." Joseph crumpled the paper. "He's trying to have me declared unfit before I die, which would invalidate any will I write. Everything would revert to existing succession laws, giving him guardianship of Dorothy. What do we do?" Joseph looked at her pregnant belly, then at Dorothy clinging to Juliet's skirt. "We fight. Right will document everything. My lucidity, your pregnancy, Dorothy's testimony about the Cunninghams' cruelty. We build a case so ironclad that even after I'm gone, Jeremy can't touch any of you." That night, Juliet lay awake, hands on her swelling abdomen where 2 babies grew. One might be the son Joseph desperately needed. But what if the other was a daughter? What if both were daughters? She thought of his words, another burden, and she made a decision. She would protect both these children, regardless of sex, even if it meant lying to her dying husband, even if it meant risking everything, because some things mattered more than bargains and legacies. Some things mattered more than dukes and succession. Her children, all of them, born and unborn, would know they were wanted, valued, loved, even if she had to teach their father that lesson in his final months. The war with Jeremy Cunningham was escalating. But so was something else, a fragile bond between three people learning that family isn't always about blood and birth order. Sometimes it's about who chooses to fight for you when everything falls apart. At 3 months pregnant, Juliet began her own investigation, while Joseph met with solicitors and physicians documenting his mental competency. She enlisted Samuel, now healthier from proper treatment, to help trace Jeremy Cunningham's history. What they discovered was monstrous. In the estate's archives, buried beneath years of correspondence, Juliet found discrepancies in financial records dating back 15 years, payments to Joseph's accounts that never arrived, investment returns that were reported but never materialized, forged signatures on documents transferring assets to shell companies, companies that Samuel's research revealed belonged to Jeremy's family members. "He's been stealing from the estate for over a decade," Samuel said, spreading papers across the cottage table, systematically, carefully, probably tens of thousands of pounds. But the worst discovery came from a former household staff member Mrs. Adelaide connected them with, a lady's maid who'd served Joseph's first wife, Eleanor. The woman, now elderly and living in Brighton, spoke quietly over tea. The Duchess was ill with fever, yes, but Dr. Whitby, Jeremy Cunningham's personal physician, he changed her medications the final week, said the regular treatment wasn't working. Within 3 days, she was dead. Juliet's blood ran cold. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying. Mr. Cunningham visited Dr. Whitby privately the day before the medication changed. I'm saying the Duchess screamed that the new medicine burned, and I'm saying Dr. Whitby left England for the continent within a month, suddenly very wealthy." The woman's hands shook. "I've kept silent for 3 years out of fear. But if you're fighting him, you need to know what he is." Juliet brought the evidence to Joseph that evening. He sat in his study, so thin now that his clothes hung like shrouds. When she laid out the documents and the maid's testimony, his face transformed from disbelief to pure rage. "Eleanor," his voice broke. "He killed Eleanor to make me vulnerable, grief-stricken, easy to manipulate. The financial scandal that destroyed your political career," Juliet said quietly. "The forged documents that implicated you. It was all Jeremy, wasn't it? He needed you disgraced, isolated, so when you died, no one would question his guardianship claim." Joseph stood with difficulty, fury giving him strength. "Right. Now, I want Jeremy banned, investigated, prosecuted. I want—" He collapsed, coughing violently. Blood sprayed across the papers. Dr. Harrison was summoned. His examination was grim. "Your Grace, the growth has accelerated. 6 weeks, perhaps 8, if you rest completely." But Joseph wouldn't rest. He dictated statements to write, provided documentation, named witnesses. Jeremy was formally banned from all Hartfield properties. Legal charges were prepared: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Jeremy's response was swift and vicious. He filed countersuits claiming defamation, threatened to expose the pregnant maid's deception, and began spreading rumors throughout London society that Joseph had lost his mind and married his former servant in a morphine-induced delusion. The scandal erupted across society. Newspapers published cartoons of the Mad Duke and his scheming bride. Invitations were withdrawn. Former political allies distanced themselves. Through it all, Juliet held steady. She was 4 months pregnant now, her belly visibly swelling. Dorothy had taken to sleeping in Juliet's dressing room, terrified that Uncle Jeremy would somehow take her in the night. Samuel helped manage the estate ledgers. Mrs. Adelaide ran the household with fierce loyalty. And Joseph, dying, emaciated, barely able to walk, taught Juliet everything. Which tenant families were reliable, which fields needed drainage, how to negotiate with merchants, how to read account books for hidden theft. One midnight, pain keeping him awake, Joseph called Juliet to his bedchamber. She came in her nightgown, her pregnant belly round beneath white cotton. "Sit with me," he said. Not an order, a request. She sat on the bed's edge. Joseph reached out, hesitated, then placed his skeletal hand on her stomach. "I feel movement," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "That's our child," Juliet said softly, "growing strong." "If it's a girl," he began. Juliet stiffened. "If it's a girl," Joseph continued, "I want you to know I'll love her. I've been wrong about so many things, Juliet, about you, about Dorothy, about what matters." His grey eyes met hers. "These months with you have taught me that legacy isn't about sons and titles. It's about who we protect and how we love." Tears blurred Juliet's vision. "You mean that?" "I do. Boy or girl, this child will be wanted, cherished. I promise you that." Juliet felt the twin secret burn in her chest. She should tell him, she should confess, but looking at his wasted face, seeing the peace there for the first time since their wedding, she couldn't destroy it. "Thank you," she whispered instead. Joseph pulled her hand to his lips, kissed it gently. "No, thank you. For saving Dorothy, for fighting Jeremy, for seeing past my bitterness to whatever this has become between us." "What has it become?" Juliet asked. Joseph smiled sadly. "Something I didn't think I deserved. Something I wish I had more time to explore." Outside, winter settled over Surrey. The Cunninghams circled like vultures. And inside Juliet, 2 babies grew. One boy, one girl, both about to inherit a war they didn't ask for. But they would also inherit something else. A mother who would die before letting anyone call them burdens. And a father who was learning, finally, what love really meant, even if he was learning too late. Labor began 3 weeks early at 2 in the morning. Juliet woke to a contraction so fierce she couldn't breathe. She gripped the bedpost, counting seconds, and immediately thought, "Thomas, stay alive to meet them." Joseph had insisted on being called Thomas in private during their final months together. It was Dorothy who'd started it, and somehow the informality had become intimate. Mrs. Adelaide summoned the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, and sent riders for Dr. Harrison in London. But he was 3 hours away, and the contractions were accelerating. Then, at 4 in the morning, Jeremy Cunningham arrived. "I heard Her Grace was in labor," he said smoothly to Mrs. Adelaide at the door. "As family friend and godfather to Lady Dorothy, I came to offer support." Mrs. Adelaide blocked his entry. "The Duke banned you from these premises, Mr. Cunningham. The Duke is dying and delusional. I have every right." He pushed past her, heading toward the main staircase. Dorothy, unable to sleep with the household in chaos, had been sitting in the upstairs hallway. She watched Jeremy climb the stairs, watched him pause outside the birthing room where Juliet's screams echoed. And then she saw him slip into the adjacent sitting room, where Mrs. Patterson had left her medical bag. The child crept closer, pressing herself against the wall. Jeremy's voice low and urgent. "Mrs. Patterson, a word." The midwife emerged, wiping her hands. "Mr. Cunningham, this is highly irregular." £200, Jeremy said quietly. "If the child is female, you report it as stillborn. The body can be disposed of quietly. No one need know." Dorothy's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. "Sir, that's 300. Final offer. The Duke is dying anyway. A female heir complicates succession. You'd be doing everyone a favor." The midwife's face hardened with greed. "The Duke has been difficult. Very well. But payment immediately." Dorothy ran. She burst into the birthing room, where Juliet lay on the bed, sweat-soaked and panting between contractions. "Mama Juliet, Uncle Jeremy, he's paying Mrs. Patterson. He wants to kill the baby if it's a girl." Juliet's eyes went wide. Through her pain, she understood instantly. "Dorothy, listen carefully. Run to the stables. Wake Henry the groom. Tell him to ride for Dr. Harrison immediately. Emergency, life or death. Then wake your father. Tell him Jeremy is here. Go." Dorothy fled. Mrs. Patterson returned, her face a mask of professional calm. "Your Grace, the child is coming soon. You must push." "Get out," Juliet said, through gritted teeth. "Your Grace, I'm the midwife." "Get out," Juliet screamed. "Mrs. Adelaide, remove this woman immediately, or I'll have her arrested for conspiracy." Mrs. Adelaide, who'd been warming water in the adjoining room, appeared instantly. One look at Juliet's face told her everything. She physically dragged the protesting midwife from the room. Juliet was alone. The contractions were overwhelming. She could feel the babies moving down. She had no medical training, no help, just instinct and desperation. At 6:47 in the morning, as golden light broke through the windows, Thomas Joseph Mason entered the world. Juliet caught her own son, sobbing and laughing simultaneously. His cry was strong, furious, beautiful. She barely had time to wrap him in a sheet before the next contraction hit. At 6:55, 8 minutes later, Catherine Eleanor Mason arrived. Smaller than her brother, but breathing, crying, perfect. Juliet held both babies against her chest, shaking with exhaustion and triumph. "You're here. You're both here. And no one will ever call you unwanted. I promise." Dr. Harrison arrived at 7, brought by Henry's breakneck ride. He found Juliet propped against pillows, a baby in each arm, defiant and fierce despite the blood soaking the sheets. "Good God," Harrison breathed. "Twins, Your Grace, you delivered them yourself?" "I had motivation." Juliet nodded toward the door, where Jeremy's voice could be heard arguing with servants. "Someone tried to ensure only a son would survive. Both my children live. Now bring me my husband." Joseph was carried in by 2 footmen. He could barely lift his head, his body wasted to almost nothing. But when they placed Thomas in his skeletal arms, tears streamed down his hollow cheeks. "A son," he whispered. "Thank God, a son." Then Juliet said quietly, "Thomas, look at me." He turned his head. "You have a daughter too, Thomas and Catherine, twins." For one terrible moment, Joseph simply stared at the second baby. Juliet held her breath, waiting for disappointment, for the another burden she feared. Instead, Joseph began to weep harder. Twins. My God, Juliet. 2 children. 2 miracles. Dorothy, who'd been waiting in the hallway, crept in. She climbed carefully onto the bed and took Catherine's tiny hand. "Papa, this is my sister. I've always wanted a sister. Please don't send her away." Joseph looked at his three children, Dorothy's pleading face, Thomas's scrunched newborn features, Catherine's tiny perfection. Something fundamental broke open in him. "Never," he whispered hoarsely. "Never. They're all mine. All perfect. No more bargains. No more sons over daughters. Just family. Just love." From the doorway, Jeremy's voice rose in fury. "You concealed twins! Fraud! This marriage is invalid!" "Mr. Cunningham," Dr. Harrison said coldly, stepping into the hallway, "I have a witness who will testify you attempted to bribe a midwife to commit infanticide. I suggest you leave before I summon the magistrate." Jeremy's face went purple with rage, but he retreated. His final gambit failed. In the birthing room, Joseph held his son with Dorothy, supporting the baby's weight. Juliet held Catherine, and for the first time in their entire marriage, they looked at each other not as duke and desperate woman, not as dying man and purchased wife, but as parents who'd fought through hell to protect their children. "Thank you," Joseph breathed, "for them, for all of this, for teaching me what matters." Juliet smiled through her tears. "We taught each other. Subscribe now, because what happens next will break your heart and then rebuild it." Joseph's final days, the legal war for the children's future, and Juliet's ultimate triumph are coming. You won't want to miss how this impossible love story ends. Joseph Mason lived for 14 more days, not peacefully, not without pain, but with a clarity and purpose that transformed his final hours into something almost sacred. The morning after the birth, he summoned Bartholomew Wright to his bedchamber. Juliet sat beside him, still weak from delivery, while Dorothy held baby Catherine and a nurse cradled Thomas nearby. "I'm rewriting everything," Joseph told Wright. His voice was barely a whisper, but iron-hard with determination. "The entire will, everything." Wright opened his leather case, prepared to write. "Your wishes, Your Grace. The estates will be divided equally among all three children. Dorothy inherits Hartfield Manor and the Surrey properties outright at age 21, regardless of marriage status. She answers to no husband, no guardian, no man. It's hers by blood and by right." Wright's pen scratched rapidly. This was revolutionary, giving a daughter such autonomy. Thomas inherits the dukedom, the parliamentary seat, and the London properties. Catherine inherits the Yorkshire estates and all investment portfolios. Joseph paused, coughing blood into a cloth. "No child of mine will ever be a bargaining chip. Not ever again." "And the Duchess?" Wright asked. "Juliet becomes Dowager Duchess, with full administrative control until Thomas reaches age 25. She's not regent, she's administrator. Equal power to any male heir. Her decisions are final and binding." Joseph looked at Juliet, his grey eyes holding hers. "She's earned that right 1,000 times over." Over the following days, Joseph did something extraordinary. He spent every lucid moment with his children. Dorothy read to him from storybooks, her young voice filling the sick room with tales of adventure. The twins were brought to him hourly, and he would touch their tiny faces with trembling fingers, memorizing every detail. "Tell them about me," he said to Dorothy one afternoon, "when they're old enough to understand. Tell them I was difficult and bitter and wrong about many things." "Papa, don't." "No, darling. The truth matters. Tell them I believed sons were more valuable than daughters, and I was catastrophically wrong. Tell them I threw away a good woman because I was grieving and stupid. Tell them I wasted years in bitterness when I could have been living." He touched her cheek. "But tell them also that I learned. That in my final months, I understood what really mattered, that I died loving all of you equally and fiercely. Dorothy wept into his shoulder. I'll tell them, Papa. I promise. Joseph wrote letters, 17 of them, one for each of Thomas's birthdays until he turned 18. One for each of Catherine's. 5 for Dorothy. To Thomas, you are my son and my heir, but never let that title become your prison. I nearly destroyed everything by valuing legacy over love. Learn from my mistakes. Your sisters are your equals. Protect them, yes, but also listen to them. They will make you better than I ever was. To Catherine, you were born 8 minutes after your brother, but you are not second to anyone. Your mother delivered you both alone, protecting you from men who would have harmed you simply for being female. Never forget that your life has value beyond marriage and childbearing. You are a Mason. You are extraordinary. To Dorothy, my firstborn, my daughter who taught me, finally, how to be a father. I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner. Sorry I let my obsession with heirs blind me to the miracle I already had. You deserved better from me. I hope these final months have shown you what I should have shown you from the beginning. You are enough. You have always been enough. One night, barely conscious, Joseph whispered to Juliet as she sat beside his bed, I love you. I don't know when it happened, somewhere between hating you and needing you and respecting you, but I do. I love you. Juliet's tears fell onto their clasped hands. I love you too, against all reason and sense. I love you. Do you forgive me for what I did 3 years ago? Juliet was quiet for a long moment. I forgive the man who learned, the man who's fighting to protect our children with his last breaths. That man I forgive completely. And the man I was? Him I'm still working on. But I have time. You gave me time. Joseph smiled faintly. Time. The one thing I wanted most. And you've made these months count more than all the years before. On the 14th day, Joseph's breathing changed. Dr. Harrison administered morphine, but Joseph fought the drowsiness. Need to see them. All of them. Once more. They brought all 3 children. Dorothy climbed onto the bed, careful of her father's frail body. Juliet held Thomas and Catherine, one in each arm. She positioned herself so Joseph's left hand could touch Dorothy. His right hand could rest on the twins. My family, he breathed. My beautiful family. Dorothy kissed his forehead. We love you, Papa. Love you all. So much. Juliet, protect them. Teach them. Kindness. Justice. Tell them. His voice faded to almost nothing. Tell them some things matter more than legacy. Love matters. Family matters. You matter. I will, Juliet promised. I swear it. Joseph's eyes moved to each face one final time. Then his hand, which had been gripping Juliet's, relaxed. His chest rose once more, fell, and didn't rise again. He died at dawn on December the 3rd, 1826, surrounded by the family he'd almost destroyed but ultimately saved. Not peacefully. Death from organ failure is never peaceful. But purposefully. Knowing he'd left something better than titles and estates. He'd left children who would know they were valued, a wife who would ensure justice, and a legacy written not in bloodlines, but in love, learned late and given fully in the end. Dorothy sobbed into her father's chest. The twins, too young to understand, simply slept. And Juliet, holding her children while touching her dead husband's face, whispered, Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for becoming who you were meant to be. Outside, Winter snow began to fall over Surrey, covering the estates in white. Inside, a new chapter was beginning, one written by a woman who'd been bought, despised, and ultimately entrusted with everything. The war with Jeremy Cunningham was about to begin, but Joseph had given Juliet the weapons she needed: ironclad documentation, loyal witnesses, and the moral authority of a mother protecting her children. She would not fail him. She would not fail them. The Dowager Duchess of Hartfield was ready for battle. Jeremy Cunningham contested the will within 3 days of Joseph's burial. His lawyer delivered the papers to Hartfield Manor with barely concealed satisfaction. The marriage was a fraud, Jeremy declared to anyone who would listen at London clubs and society gatherings. She seduced my dying friend, concealed a twin pregnancy to manipulate him, and now claims the entire estate. It's obscene. Joseph wasn't of sound mind. The morphine, the illness, he didn't know what he was signing. The legal battle consumed 6 brutal months. Juliet, still recovering from childbirth and grieving Joseph, faced attacks on every front. Jeremy's lawyers dug up her father's debts. Her dismissal for alleged theft painted her as a desperate fortune hunter who'd trapped a vulnerable, dying man. The newspapers devoured it. The calculating maid, the Duke's deathbed folly, from servant to duchess, a scandalous ascension. Cartoons appeared showing Juliet as a scheming harpy hovering over Joseph's deathbed, babies clutched like prizes. Former society acquaintances cut her publicly. Invitations vanished. When she walked through London with the children, people whispered and pointed. Through it all, Juliet held steady. She had 3 children to protect and a dead husband's trust to honor. The preliminary hearing took place in February 1827. Jeremy's lead counsel, a vicious barrister named Sterling, went for Juliet's throat immediately. "Mrs. Mason," he sneered, deliberately using her maiden name. "Isn't it true you accepted His Grace's proposal purely for financial gain?" "Yes," Juliet answered, clearly from the witness box. "His Grace offered security. I offered him an heir. It was a transaction both parties entered willingly and legally." The courtroom murmured. Her honesty was unexpected. "And you concealed the fact that you were carrying twins?" "I discovered the twin pregnancy at 14 weeks. I disclosed it to no one because I feared, correctly as it happens, that Mr. Bourne Cunningham would attempt to harm any female child born to prevent a clear succession." "That's a convenient excuse." "It's documented fact," Juliet interrupted coldly. "Dr. Edmund Pritchard of Harley Street will testify that I requested discretion, specifically citing fears of foul play. And those fears were proven accurate when Mr. Cunningham attempted to bribe the midwife to report my daughter as stillborn." Sterling's face reddened. "Alleged bribery, witnessed bribery, by Lady Dorothy Mason, age 5, and confirmed by the midwife herself under oath." Wright presented the documentation methodically. Physician testimony confirming Joseph's sound mind throughout the marriage. Marriage witnesses attesting to the legitimacy of the ceremony. Joseph's detailed letters to his children, written in his own hand, demonstrating clear intent and rational thought. Then came the evidence that destroyed Jeremy's case entirely. Wright stood before the judge, holding a thick folder. "My lord, we present evidence of Mr. Jeremy Cunningham's character and actions spanning 15 years. What followed was devastating. Testimony from former servants describing years of cruelty. A maid Jeremy had beaten so severely she lost hearing in one ear. A stable boy he'd kicked unconscious. Police reports from 3 different counties documenting assaults, financial records showing systematic embezzlement from the Hartfield estates, over £40,000 stolen through forged documents and shell companies. And finally, the testimony of Eleanor Mason's former lady's maid, describing the suspicious circumstances of the late Duchess's death and Dr. Van Whitby's sudden wealth and flight to the continent. "This is the man," Wright addressed the court, his voice ringing with controlled fury, "who claims moral superiority, who accuses the Dowager Duchess of impropriety while his own character is demonstrated repeatedly to be violent, fraudulent, and quite possibly murderous." Sterling tried to object, to deflect, but the evidence was overwhelming. Then came Dorothy's testimony. At 6 years old, she was technically too young to testify, but the judge allowed it, given the extraordinary circumstances. She sat in the witness box, small and serious, and spoke clearly. "Uncle Jeremy hurt me. He pinched my arms and said accidents happen to little girls who inherit too much. Aunt Dorothy said, when Papa died, they would teach me proper manners." Dorothy's voice didn't waver. "But Mama Juliet stopped them. She promised to keep me safe, and she did." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "Do you believe the Duchess loves you?" the judge asked gently. "Yes, sir. She loves me and Thomas and Catherine all the same. Papa said that's what matters, loving all your children equally, not just the boys." On a cold March morning, Juliet sat in the courtroom with 6-month-old Thomas in her lap and Catherine in a nurse's arms. Dorothy sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. Samuel had travelled from Surrey to stand with them. The judge cleared his throat. The marriage between Duke Joseph Mason and Juliet Cleverly was legal, properly witnessed, and entered into by both parties of sound mind. The children, Lady Dorothy Mason, Lord Thomas Mason, and Lady Catherine Mason, are all legitimate and confirmed as heirs by multiple testimonies and medical records. He looked directly at Jeremy. "The Dowager Duchess will serve as administrator of the estates until the young Duke reaches his majority with full legal authority. Mr. Cunningham's claims are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, given the evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy presented, I am referring this matter to the Crown Prosecution for criminal investigation." The gavel fell. Juliet closed her eyes, holding Thomas tight. Dorothy squeezed her hand. "We won, Mama Juliet. We won." Outside the courthouse, Jeremy was waiting, his face twisted with rage. "You scheming bitch! This isn't over. Juliet stopped, looked him directly in the eye. Her voice was steady, cold as winter. "My husband saved these estates from you. I will die before I let you destroy his legacy. Come near me, or my children again, and I will have you arrested. Good day, Mr. Cunningham." She walked away, head high, children around her. Behind her, Jeremy's curses faded into nothing. She had won. The estates were secure. The children were safe. Joseph's trust had been honored. But she was exhausted, grieving, and utterly alone with a massive responsibility. The real work was just beginning. 10 years passed like pages turning in a book Juliet had written herself. She was 37 now, standing at the window of Joseph's old study, her study watching the Surrey countryside glow in spring sunlight. The estates had transformed under her administration. Modern farming techniques increased yields while reducing labor hours. She'd built 3 schools for tenants' children, hiring 6 teachers. Fair wages became standard across all Hartfield properties. A medical dispensary operated year-round, staffed by physicians who visited weekly. Other nobles began copying her methods. The Dowager Duchess of Hartfield became known not for scandal, but for innovation and compassion. Invitations arrived regularly to economic conferences, agricultural societies, reform meetings. Marriage proposals came too, from widowers and ambitious younger sons seeking her wealth and influence. Juliet declined them all politely. Well, almost all. Dr. Benjamin Harrison had proposed 2 years ago, not for her title or fortune, but because he'd fallen in love with the woman who'd fought so fiercely for her children. Their wedding had been quiet, genuine, built on mutual respect and affection rather than desperation. She remained the Dowager Duchess by choice, continuing her administrative duties alongside her new husband. Some things were too important to surrender. On this particular spring morning, Juliet watched her children in the gardens below. Dorothy, now 15, walked with confident grace, explaining crop rotation to the new estate manager. She wore practical clothing, carried ledgers under her arm, and spoke with authority that made grown men listen respectfully. The twins, Thomas and Catherine, at 10 years old, raced through the apple orchard, inseparable as always. Thomas was gentle and thoughtful, already showing signs of his father's sharp intellect. Catherine was bold and passionate, with a fierce sense of justice that reminded Juliet of herself. "They're beautiful," Dr. Harrison said, joining her at the window. He slipped an arm around her waist. "They're everything Joseph hoped they'd be," Juliet replied softly. "Everything he learned to value too late." That afternoon, as they did every year on the anniversary of Joseph's death, the family walked to the cemetery on the hillside. They carried white roses, Dorothy's tradition, started the year after her father died. The gravestone was simple: Lord Joseph Thomas Mason, Duke of Hartfield, 1785–1826. Beloved father. He learned what mattered. Dorothy placed her roses first, kneeling in the grass. "Hello, Papa. We're doing well, all of us. The Surrey estates had record yields this year. I negotiated new contracts with 3 merchants. You would have approved of the terms." Thomas added his flowers carefully. "Mama says you were complicated, that you made mistakes, but tried to fix them at the end. I hope I can learn from your wisdom without repeating your errors." Catherine, always the bold one, touched the gravestone directly. "Did you really only want boys at first?" Dorothy smiled sadly, pulling her sister close. "At first, yes. He was obsessed with male heirs and succession. But he learned, Kathy, that's what matters. He learned that daughters are just as valuable as sons. That family is about love, not bloodlines." "Tell him about the school," Thomas prompted. "Oh," Catherine brightened. "Papa, we're building another school in Yorkshire, on my lands. Mama says I get to help design it. It'll have science equipment and a proper library and everything." Juliet knelt beside her children, placing her own roses. "Your father gave me 6 months and demanded the impossible. He wanted a son, no daughters. What he got was 3 children who would teach him and the world that worth isn't determined by gender or birth order." She touched the stone gently. "I forgive you now, Joseph. All of it. The dismissal, the bitterness, the terrible bargain. Because you gave me these 3 miracles, and you learned to love them as they deserved. That's more than most people manage." That evening, in her private study, Juliet opened the worn leather journal where she'd recorded their story over the years. She wrote the final entry. "Give me a son, no daughters," he demanded. How impossibly small that demand seems now, 10 years later. Joseph got 3 children who are changing their world. Dorothy is training to become one of England's first female estate administrators, revolutionary and right. Thomas will be a duke who listens to his sisters and values justice over tradition. Catherine will inherit Yorkshire and run it with brilliance and compassion. They know their father's story, all of it, the bitterness, the mistakes, the desperate bargain, and the transformation. They know he started wrong and ended right, that he learned to see value beyond gender and titles. To anyone reading this years from now, love isn't always romance and grand gestures. Sometimes it's respect earned through fire, partnership forged in desperation, the choice to honor someone even when it's hard. Joseph and I had 6 months of marriage, but we made them count. He taught me that even broken people can change. I taught him that some things matter more than legacy and succession. What matters is this: children who know they're valued. Estates managed with justice. A world slowly changing because people chose dignity over tradition. I came to Surrey expecting 6 months of bitter servitude. I found a lifetime of purpose. And perhaps that's the greatest gift, turning someone else's desperation into your own destiny, taking broken pieces and building something beautiful. Joseph died learning. I lived building. And our children will thrive knowing they were worth fighting for. That's enough. That's everything. Juliet closed the journal and looked out at the prosperous estates stretching toward the horizon. Thomas's laughter drifted from the garden, where Catherine was teaching him to climb trees like a proper adventurer. Dorothy appeared at the study door, holding account books, ready for their evening review. Dr. Harrison brought tea, kissed Juliet's temple, and settled beside her with his medical journals. The sun set over Surrey, painting everything gold, a legacy secured not through sons over daughters, but through justice, transformation, and the radical choice to believe that everyone, even embattled, bitter dukes, deserves a chance to become better before they die. "Give me a son, no daughters," Joseph had demanded at their beginning. In the end, he got 3 children who would change the world, 2 daughters and a son, who would learn from both their strength and their father's hard-won wisdom. And sometimes, getting exactly what you didn't know you needed is the greatest gift of all. If this story touched your heart, subscribe now and share it with someone who needs to hear that love can bloom in the unlikeliest places, that people can change even at the end, and that our greatest strength often comes from choosing dignity in desperate circumstances. More stories like this are coming. Stories of courage, sacrifice, redemption, and the transformative power of seeing and being seen. Don't miss what's next. Like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. Thank you for being part of this journey.
If you enjoyed this story, we appreciate you a whole lot and look forward to connecting with you as we build a community on this channel. Every day, we will put out more stories, so we need your support. Help us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. You won't miss any new exciting videos. Check out the next video. You'll love it!